So, welcome to Talking Insights. I'm your host, Antonio, and today we have the second episode of the three-part series about the work of Esomar. I'm in the studio today, the
The
newly
newly
improved
improved
studio,
studio.
and I'm with my colleague, Xabier Palacio. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you, Antonio. It's a pleasure to be here, as always.
Thank you. And this time we'll discuss one of the pillar works of SMR, the ICC SMR International Codes, also known as Code of Conduct. There's a lot of names for this. It's such an important document that the industry upholds and trusts. And that's why the team is reviewing it, right, Xavier? Can you explain me a bit more about the code and what's this document about?
All right. So that's one question that could require a response or an answer of an hour, but I'll try to keep it simple. So the code of conduct is basically the documents that every SMR member undersigns. Members, of course, as we know, are either companies as well as individuals. And these companies could either be market research agencies, they could also be sample panel providers, they could also be technology providers for research, or those companies on the client side, which especially nowadays have large dedicated teams for analysis. So what this code does is, I like to think about it as like leveling the playing field and making, clarifying the rules of the game. So the code of conduct presents a few principles that every, say, research project or every researcher needs to abide by. These principles are, well, we'll talk about this a little bit later, of course, as we can continue, because these principles have or are being refined with this revision. But we can talk about this a bit more. But they guide how to do research. I guess what I would like to highlight with this is that why is there a code of conduct at all if in every country we already have legislation that should regulate how things ought to be done. But the code of conduct, what it allows is to propose a level of self-regulation. And this self-regulation is important because this is what we can communicate to the legislator, that the industry is responsible, that we can do, that we identify the problems by ourselves and we can resolve those problems. So the legislator trusts that we are a self-governing industry, that we do things properly and responsibly.
Okay. You mentioned the consultation. Basically, there's a team working on a consultation. For what you told me previously, this is something that happens from a few years to a few years. It's like a periodic situation. What is this consultation about?
Yes. So even though the code of conduct includes a few principles to guide how research ought to be conducted, the truth is that, of course, over the decades, the industry itself has changed very substantially. So we have the first code of conduct was developed in 1976. Back then, just to go back to basics, there was no internet. So the impact of the internet was huge moment, and that things like or those types of development means that the code needs to be revisited, needs to be reviewed to see if these principles still hold in the age of, for example, passive research. There have been quite a few revisions over time. The last one happened in 2016. In 2016, we had some other concerns like the remote research or passive research, sample providers, etc. And as of today, we have some other types of, for example, things that have popped up in the industry, like, for example, in artificial intelligence, things like this. So this, again, prompts us to say, how good does the code still hold to represent the industry? What needs to change? What else needs to cover?
So basically, with the pass of time, the code will just get bigger and bigger and more in depth with all the topics that wants to touch upon, right?
we tried that. That doesn't quite happen. No, because at the end of the day, you would be surprised how well these principles hold. What we need to ensure is that the risks that some of these new technologies bring, that they are properly covered. So some principles, like for example, transparency, they are say as important as ever, but they need not be expanded. But for example, they may, or we may want to recognize that some of these new technologies have a higher risk for transparency. Just to give you an example, I mean, we know that AI is very powerful at identifying what for us could be hidden patterns. So what for at a human level we consider a level of privacy, maybe AI can uncover that level of privacy. Therefore, there is, can create a risk. So these are things that we need to think by ourselves, and how the code really codifies, of course, these types of risks, and how how we continue to guarantee responsible execution.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's one of those things that you kind of just take for granted in some situations, but then you need some laws, you need some codes of conduct, to make your market your jobs. This is a partnership, a relation, I don't know what you want to call it, with the ICC, the International Government Codes. How is this partnership happen? Tell me a bit about the history. I mean, I'm pretty sure that this was like ages ago.
Yes.
Probably in
Yes.
when the first one was released. But what's this? Do you know about the story of this?
Yes. So the thing is that what market research does is it informs companies on how to make decisions, right? It also, of course, informs other stakeholders, because, say, social opinion or polling informs governments. But at the end of the day, what it informs is what is in the mind of the consumer, so that somebody else can make decisions. Companies will make decisions in order to, of course, maximize their sales or whatever is their corporate objective. So it is almost by necessity very, very linked to the marketing activity by itself. Because companies are largely the clients of research, it all embeds. And because market research also informs the promotional activity, advertising, etc., then the code of conduct of market research makes sense that it is well aligned with that of marketing. And that's why decades ago, and that is a good point. I don't recall if it was in the 70s or in the 80s, but we aligned with the International Chamber of Commerce, so that this code is also part of the constellation, which is not a big one, but it is a very specific constellation of codes from the from the International Chamber of Commerce code on marketing practices.
And you mentioned companies, like the way that companies use the codes to kind of self-govern and self-understand and do their job. But the companies also are a part of the code, right? They also work on reviewing the code and the consultation and everything. And I imagine that this is also in partnership with the ICC. So group project, let's say, right?
Indeed. And actually we like a code revision team, which is composed by people from, of course, from Esomar's professional standards committee, like Judith Passingham, Raymond Wildner, as well as people from the International Chamber of Commerce as well, of course, like Anders Stenlund and Axel Tanberg, or Georgiana de Gerato, of course, and some other people that, again, from the market research side, like Philippe Gilbert, people from other associations, like, for example, Melanie Courtright from the USA, as well as people from, as you were mentioning, companies, the client side, right? Like Vinay, I do have, and some other people from the professional standards committee, like Kathy Joe and our pen holder, David Pring. So this is quite a lot of people discussing all these changes. I wouldn't say discussing the changes, discussing what the initial consultation told us. So in late 2023, we made a public consultation saying, all right, we are going to review the code. What changes do you think we should cover? And that's where we got a whole list of topics from all local associations. And let's not forget that more than 60 associations all around the world are using the ICC Esomar code as their own, plus other stakeholders, just to, and of course Esomar members, just to get ideas on what we should cover. So this has been this massive discussion that we've been having.
Right.
I think, sorry, on your point as well, on companies also being part of the code and using this code, I think that touches on another element which is quite integral to this revision, which is it is not only market research agencies the ones doing research. Also companies and firms that have, which their core business is not doing research, they are also, of course, conducting research. Just to give an example, Coca-Cola is a massive company. They need to understand what their consumers think. They have an analytics department and they conduct market research. So they also need to abide by this code and many others, of course.
And we kind of touched that on the previous episodes where we talked about one of the products and one of the reports that we do within Esomar, the evolution of insights. And we kind of touch on that the brands and the companies are starting to evolve to having their own in-house market researchers, and it's kind of becoming like a whole mesh of an industry in whatsoever. Do you think that it's not basically it's a way to bring those people to the conversation and make sure that the code is as important and updated as for everyone, because if the industry is just expanding and meshing, it's important to have everyone's input, right?
Yes. So one of the things that the revision of the code also touches upon is the definition of researcher, right? And we need to understand that a researcher is not the person sitting within a market research agency. A researcher is that person conducting research as it is defined. So though everyone conducting research has the responsibility, research they undertake, of course. And more, or there has been this trend of researchers now being found in these types of companies. So this is indeed, we talked a little bit about this in that previous episode, but that is part of the cascade of considerations that we are making for the code. Just to give you an example, so we mentioned that there are technological developments that are changing the way the industry works, right? The most recent one and the most one that is in everybody's mouth and minds is artificial intelligence. So it is allowing for plenty of, or for a big part of the operation to be internalized by these, by companies, all types of companies actually. And it's simplifying the way we identify data or the way we write the reports. But this basically allows for what we call the disintermediation of the value chain, which is more and more elements can be carried out by more independent companies, but also more and more parts of the value chain can be internalized by these companies. So that in itself means that those carrying out research need to be responsible for how they implement artificial intelligence, how they communicate the results, or, and again, we go back to the transparency. So it is all these elements that were, uncovered from the first consultation. We created this text. Now we have a first version, and now we are in this first consultation of our proposed text of the code.
When can we expect to have the new, finalized, revised, revised?
So this is a whole process. So we want to, of course, be ourselves very transparent and allow for all the voices who have an opinion to voice that opinion. We are right now on this first revision. It ends in just a few days. Then we will take all this input and create a second text, and we will have up to 2 more consultations. Once we have this finalized text and we have allowed everybody to agree to it, it will be submitted for final approval at Esomar's annual general meeting, and this will happen in June for next year. So this is a little bit timeline. So as of June, we will have a shiny new code that the entire industry will be invited to abide by.
It's a very democratized process, right? Everyone has a voice, everyone has a vote, everyone has to agree on everything, and I think that's the way to bring the industry to a new standard.
Yes, and to some extent, I think it couldn't happen any other way in market research and in the environment we live in.
Yeah.
Especially with so many stakeholders. Again, there are also more than 60 countries that call this code their own. So we need the agreement of plenty of or a very diverse set of stakeholders.
No, I agree, and it's important to always keep in mind the self-regulation and the build that we have, and the trust that we have to build within the industry, and all these code and how all the publications and everything kind of bring that up, and the public can understand how the companies and how the industry in general is doing. So yeah, I think it's really important to have these type of situations.
I think so, yeah, because at the end, and this is perhaps one of the key aspects of the code, it manages to do a few things. By conducting research responsibly, then we count with the trust of the individuals. At the end of the day, the individuals are the data owners. They provide the data. If they don't trust how research is being conducted, they will not share their data. And we're already seeing this with a lower response rate for some questionnaires, as well as in the more technological aspect, everybody upping the privacy settings in their phones, in their computers, etc. So it helps with public trust. But secondly, it also helps with trust from governments and from the legislator. Because if they don't perceive that the industry is behaving responsibly, they're going to create sets of laws to rein the industry in and to limit what it can do. So that limitation can sometimes, if done massively, can curtail development for the industry. So it can very quickly harm and keep us from really expanding. So self-regulation really is key on this entire global discussion.
That's right. Well, thank you very much for the conversation. As always, I feel like I always learn a lot with our conversations. Like ever since I joined Esomar, I've been learning a lot with everything that you say, and even in the live conferences. So thank you very much for the conversation.
No, thank you. Thank you for your words. And hope also the audience thinks the same. So happy to be here as always.
And that's all for today. It's always a pleasure to have these conversations with Xabier and the team here at Esomar. And as I said in the beginning, this month we have 3 special episodes dedicated to the work we do within the company. Next up, we'll have a preview of APAC, the next event that we'll be holding in Bangkok in early November. So like and subscribe and keep an eye for the next episode.